Hey there, and thanks so much for joining us on this video today. We are talking empathy, compassion, and humanity during remote learning. And if you've been seeing any resources coming out about remote learning, I'll bet the words empathy, compassion, and humanity are not the ones at the top of the list of what's been describing all of that. And that's why I'm so excited that we've got this video to share with you today. We're going to have lots of ideas for you, lots of things for you to think about when it comes to all of this. So welcome so much to you for being here. That was a really weird way to say that. Let me try that again. Welcome to the video. So my name is Matt Miller. I'm the author of Ditch That Textbook. I am the one who has this YouTube channel that you're watching, and wanted to kick it over to my co-host, Holly Clark, real quick. Holly, you want to do a quick introduction?
Holly from the Infused Classroom, San Diego. That's all we need to know. Let's learn about humanity.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So if you're watching this live, then hello, thank you for joining us. And if you can get into the comments, we would love for you to check in and tell us who you are and what you do and where you are, if you're interested in doing that. If you're watching this on the replay, welcome. We're so glad that you found us. And you're going to get the benefit of lots of the things coming from the comments and from our guest Mike here, all in this one video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick it over to our guest. This is Mike Soskil. So Mike, do you want to tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Soskil. I am a elementary STEM teacher in Northeastern Pennsylvania. I was the 2017-18 Pennsylvania Teacher of the Year. And most relevant to what we're talking about today, I was co-author on a book called Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which focused on how we find the intersection of keeping our schools technologically relevant and keeping them rooted in the things that are most important: compassion, empathy, humanity. And during this difficult time, that's more important than ever. So I'm excited for the conversation.
Yep, absolutely. I totally agree with you. It's super, super important. And it's been heartening for me, at least, to see so many of the educators that are identifying that and are trying to provide for that as best as they can in their classrooms. So let's do a quick check-in with the ones that are here with us live. Surprise, surprise. Yay, there's Katie Short from Ottawa. She's been in on like all of these videos for the last week or so. So glad to see her. Then there's Daryl Maxwell from Orange, California, who's a friend of mine. So glad to see Daryl here. All right, go to science. Is that Mike? That's
Beth Heidemann?
That's Beth. I thought it was. Yeah, exactly. Okay, very good. Awesome. So Beth, good to see you here. And then we've also got Tanya joining from Pennsylvania. We've also got Melissa from Indiana, fellow Hoosier in the house right here. And then we got another fellow Hoosier. There's Susie Hiley. She says, she's asking me, is this the longest you've been in Indiana for a while? Yes, absolutely. In the middle of all of these shutdowns and everything, I've been home a lot recently. So anyway, it's great to see all of you that are here with us live. So let's start to turn the conversation just a little bit towards our topic. And when it comes to these words, empathy, compassion, and humanity, like, talking about as we go forward in this world and, are getting more and more technology, and also just sort of the changes that have come along with that, it feels like those are some words that are coming less and less to the forefront. And Mike, obviously, this is something that you've identified, that you've seen in various levels and everything. And I wondered if you could just sort of paint the picture for us of what you're seeing when it comes to that.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that have jumped out most during the last week or two as Pennsylvania teachers have started to teach remotely, and other teachers around the country. But I'm most familiar with Pennsylvania because of my involvement in the teacher advisory committee here. But what we've seen is one, teachers that do have access to technology and their students have access also are trying to find ways to connect with them in a real emotional way because they realize that's most important. And we're going to talk about, I'm sure, some of the ways that you can do that. But just as importantly, I think, is the conversation about how do we make those connections with our students that don't have internet access or don't have, some of the technology tools that others do. And so there's been an incredible push to innovate solutions with, in an analog kind of way, to make sure that we're connecting with those students as well. So I think those are the two most important things right now.
Yeah. And so when we look at this, if we don't, okay, so not to take sort of the negative route here, but just to sort of paint the picture of why this is so important. Mike, take us on the dystopian trail on this for just a second. If we don't get this right, if if the empathy and the compassion and the humanity, if all of these things continue to, tail off, if we just don't get this right, what do you see as our future looking?
Yeah, so I don't have to be very imaginative to give that. There's been plenty of dystopian novels that have talked about how, or movies that have talked about how technology has taken over. Terminator, Minority Report. I just fell asleep to The Matrix the other day. Those kind of spring to mind. Now, I think those are extreme examples. But I think all of us have felt at different times, in the last decade or so, that there have been moments in our lives where technology is running our life more than we want it to. And I think you just take that and you multiply it exponentially, and that's some of the fear that we face. But let me give the positive. There is nobody in a better position to prevent that from happening than our teachers. And I'm in the process of putting together a book. You see the hashtag Flip the System, that talks about the need for teachers to lead in the education system. And I think that has never been more apparent than what we're seeing right now. It's not the U.S. Department of Education. It's not superintendents. It's not even our administrators that are innovating solutions to make sure that our kids have connection. It's teachers. And if you're on social media, you see that again and again. Teachers coming up with solutions. Teachers sharing with each other online the things that they've done for their students so that others can replicate it. The collaboration has gone through the roof. Teachers are heroes, and we're seeing that on a daily basis right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to bring up a point if I can. So one of the things I talk about a lot is that AI is going to become a really important part of our society in the next 10 years. We're going to see changes like we've never seen. In fact, Kai-Fu Lee says it's going to be a change equivalent to having electricity and not having electricity. It's going to be that dynamic. But what AI won't be able to do is the empathy, the compassion, and the humanity. So this is why it is so important that we teach these skills, because kids in a job market have to have these really honed in on in order to be successful in that time. And when we get into like 2030, life will look completely different in the way that we interact with the Internet of Things. So timely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I was waiting to see if you wanted to comment there, Matt. But
No, you're good.
So yeah, I think that's life is going to look fundamentally different, and technology is exploding faster than it ever has before, and so technology is going to be a part of how we solve things. But one of the things that has always concerned me most about this technological explosion, and I'm an ed tech guy. I come from an ed tech background, but every new technological innovation drives equity gaps further apart. Right. Yeah. So right now you've got self-driving cars in Treacle, Greece, and in self-driving Ubers in Pittsburgh, in my home state. But also 17% of the world lives without electricity. So those that have access are going to have more and more, and those without have less and less. And right now we're seeing that play out in the United States. Right. Our equity gaps are being totally exposed. And there's a lot of schools that are hesitant to teach online because now they're recognizing the equity gap. And I would say to them, where were you 2 months ago? Those equity gaps were still there. You didn't stop you from teaching. Like, this is something that should have been solved before. We can't put everything on hold, but we need to, double, triple, quadruple our commitment to making sure that we close those gaps going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so let's get to that question that we have been kind of alluding to the whole time, which is, now that we have found ourselves in this situation, in this remote learning situation, like you said, the equity gaps are here. We've got some struggles with just trying to do instruction in the first place, but we also want to make sure that we keep our children's wellness and at heart, and helping them to just be the best human beings that we can. So with that all in mind, Mike, what would you advise educators to do if they want to push empathy, compassion, humanity forward to the forefront as much as they can during these times? What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so the first thing, and this is absolutely primary, is you need to show it yourself. Right. Yeah. So now is not the time to be worrying about, what grades are in your grade book. Now is not the time to be worrying about, student GPA. Now is the time to worry about, are my students okay? And how can I make sure? I was talking with a teacher in an affluent suburban school district a couple days ago, and she said even in their district, where almost everybody has technology and it's a one-to-one district, so everyone has a device, they are missing 40% of their students. 40% of their students haven't checked in online, haven't done any of the coursework, and haven't been able to reach on the telephone. Now, I don't know if that percentage is widespread in those kinds of districts, but I would bet that in rural areas like mine and in more urban areas where there aren't devices and internet, that number is probably higher. So those are the students that need us desperately right now. I can't even imagine what's going on in some homes. As teachers, we know that there are some bad home situations. We need to find a way to get to those students. And so one of the solutions, right, because I don't want to just talk about the problems, one of the solutions that came out of a Pennsylvania Teachers Advisory Committee call this week, we've got our own professional learning committees going on, is elementary teachers are sending letters home to their students, private individualized letters, but they're sending a self-addressed stamped envelope in there with them so that their students can write back. And I think that's just an awesome, just a simple thing that you can do to make sure that you're reaching out to kids and giving them that personal interaction, even though you might not be able to do it online.
That's great. I love that. That's such a cool idea. I mean, if that's what we want, if we want that interaction and if we want to be able to hear from them, that's one way to break down a little bit of that equity gap and just empower them to be able to stay in communication. And that's absolutely huge. I love that.
Yeah. So, these are solutions that are coming from teachers, right? But it starts by identifying the problem. And the problem is not how do we make sure that we're teaching math for the rest of the year. Those things are important. Right. We'll get to them, but they're not primary. The question first is, how do I know whether my students are okay? How can I check on them if they're not? And what can I do about it? For me, coming from a STEM background, all of this is wrapped up in the design process, right? It's how we solve problems. Yeah. And so whether you're an engineer or you're a teacher right now trying to solve this problem, you go through those same steps, right? So you identify the problem, you brainstorm solutions, you figure out which one is best, you put it into place, and then you measure it to see if it worked. And if it doesn't, then you change it and do better. And I think that's the process that we need to go through now. As long as we identify the correct problem, then we can go through that process to find solutions.
Yeah. That's great. I wanted to ask you, because what we've focused on so far to this point is the compassion towards our students, basically. Right. Talking about the situation that they're in, the tough home life, the uncertainty of, everything that comes with a pandemic and everything. I wanted to turn it sort of, instead of inward on the student, maybe outward, because I know that this is something that you're passionate about is, providing for and helping other people. And I wonder if now is the time. I think I know the answer to this, but I still want to ask you, is now the time to encourage them to help, to, encourage them to reach out to other people? And if so, what would that even look like?
Yeah, so I absolutely love this question, and you knew that I would, right? You teed it up for me. But I put out a video about, 7 or 10 days ago on this very topic, because I know so many of our students are feeling powerless right now. They're feeling powerless because they are isolated at home. They can't see their friends. They know the world is, falling apart around them in some kind of way. And depending on how old they are, they can understand it or not quite. But we need to give them power back, right? And so how do we do that? And, this is the same thing that we've done in our classrooms before, or at least that I've been pushing for us to do in our classrooms, is identify problems and then solve them using that design process, design thinking. Mm-hmm. That doesn't change now. The thing that has changed is the constraints, right? So in any problem, there are constraints. You don't have $1 billion to fix your problem. You don't have all of the materials that you need. You've got to work within what you have. So right now, what you have is is having to distance yourself from other people. You're not able to really leave your house, for the most part. Only one person should be going to get groceries at a time. So these are the new constraints. So you start with the problem, what is it in my community, whether that community is local, whether it's your community of friends, whether it's your global community, but what is it in my community that I see as a problem that I have a talent or a passion to try and solve? So maybe it's, I know that I have elderly neighbors and I don't want them to have to go to the grocery store because they're in more danger than I am. Whatever that problem happens to be, right? And the next step is to then talk to the person who's impacted, because so many times we see a problem and we try to solve it without getting to the lived experiences of those we're trying to help. And when we do that, there's unintended consequences. So you reach out and you ask this person, is this, are groceries what you really need, or is there something else? Because you may be delivering groceries when they don't need them. And then once you have that problem defined, then you can go through that design process that we talked about before, understanding the constraints and say, all right, where is my power to be able to help? And even doing something as small, it's not small, but even doing something like helping a neighbor or helping a friend who might need something at this time allows our students to feel like they have power again.
Yeah.
So can I give an example of something that's happening in my neighborhood? There's these kids, and I don't know how they came up with it, but they took chalk. And I saw something on the Today Show. Someone else is doing it too, but it's happening, right? I live in a condo complex. And so the kids have taken chalk and written all over the sidewalks, like, stay healthy, we care about you, your neighbors are here. It's like this incredible thing that they just found some chalk. I assume they went to Amazon and got some chalk, or maybe they had it, but it's kind of powerful. I have to walk my dog, so I'm like walking through this yellow brick road of "We love you." It's pretty cool.
And that's it, right? I mean, so there are some students who identified, isolation and loneliness as a potential problem, right? And so they did what they could to solve it. And so I think about you as you walk through that and the good feeling that you got, right? Like, it's solving your problem a little bit because you feel a little better. But I also think about those children who decided to take that action, right? And I think about how much better they must feel about themselves, as opposed to sitting home, and not interacting or not trying to use their power in different ways. So, like, whatever the problem is that they decide that they want to solve, that's always been our job as teachers, is to support them in going out and doing that, right? And I think that's more important now than it ever has been, because right now our students are more needy emotionally than they probably have been in a while.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love, by the way, how you brought the design thinking model into all of this. Identify a problem, brainstorm some solutions, talk to the people, empathize. There's the empathy right there. Start to iterate and try things out and test it out and everything. And so we've started to see a couple of examples of this in our conversation, but I was wondering if we could really start to apply this to the situation that a lot of teachers are in right now. If you imagine that you are a second grade teacher with a bunch of kids that are at home, or if you're a high school chemistry teacher and you've got a whole bunch of kids that are home, and you want to push these ideas of empathy and compassion and humanity to the forefront of what you're doing and try to empower those kids again. What are some ways that might look? Or maybe we can take sort of a deep dive into one example and walk through the process or something, Mike.
Sure. So, again, you think about what your first step is, and your first step is listening to your students, because, right now, telling them what problem they should solve is not going to work. There's not going to be demand. They're not going to care. Right?
Never works.
Especially now. So you need to listen to them and find out, what their lived experiences are right now, so that you can help them with what they need to do. But I'm going to share. I don't know if either of you know Mari Cooper. She teaches in a district. Yeah, you just met Mari a couple months ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So she's an orchestra director outside of Pittsburgh. And her students have, over the past couple of years, come up with 4 pillars that they really care about as an orchestra. And these have driven a mission statement and community outreach from the orchestra into the community. And they do, during normal times, these pop-up concerts where they try and get beautiful orchestral music into homeless shelters and jails and food pantries and places that otherwise wouldn't have it. And that's the culture and the mission of their class. Now that things have switched online, her students came to her and they said, we're worried that we're not going to be able to do our pop-up concerts. And so they have taken it upon themselves to organize in groups of 2 or 3 or more, or sometimes individually, to use video conferencing to reach out to members of the community and make sure that they're okay by playing them orchestra music. And so I think that's just a beautiful example of how this could look. Now, she has, Maria's had the benefit of having developed this culture over time in her class beforehand. So it's somewhat easier for her to make that transition, and her students kind of knew what steps to take after they got into this new situation. But I think for those that haven't taken that step yet, you can still work on building that culture right now by having conversations. The tricky part is going to be, how do we reach those kids that aren't able to connect online? If you can't get your students onto a Zoom call, how do you still communicate with them? And I think that's when we have to look at analog solutions. I love the example of teachers driving through the community and waving at their students, right? That's a great way to make connections. It doesn't necessarily help with the design process piece, but I think, sending letters, trying to, the self-addressed stamped envelope, trying to find ways to connect analog and just build that relationship, right? Everything is about relationships. More ways that we can build those relationships, then we can start to transition into this empowerment.
Excellent. Very good. I just put it out into the comments earlier for those of you that are watching live. I'd love for you to give us some suggestions if you have any ideas of how we can, foster our empathy, compassion, and humanity with students during remote learning. And if you're watching this on the replay, it would be a great time for you to type a comment into the video, and we'll just continue to build that library of, of different ideas. But I can just imagine, and I think that it's so important that you brought up that not everybody does have access to internet. And we don't want to leave people out of this equation. And in fact, maybe the ones that need to be involved in this kind of thing the most are the ones that aren't easily accessed through, or don't have the easy access through the internet. So
yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. Those are the students that I'm most worried about, that I'm most concerned about. The ones, because even if we think about as teachers what we can do to connect, right? So even if students if they have access and they're not connecting with us, they're probably connecting with each other. There's, whether they're, playing Minecraft together. My son is probably doing that upstairs right now, with some of his friends. But, whether they're playing games together, they're still having some kind of social interaction. It's the ones who are isolated that I worry about most. So ways that we can reach out to them are most important. And if anyone in the chat has ideas, that is, I'm constantly trying to push out those kind of ideas to teachers to share.
Yeah.
What about the idea of using a phone though? Do you feel like that connection's not there? Because I'm wearing a Flipgrid sweatshirt. It's sort of my uniform right now, but only because I don't have to get dressed every day. But using a parent's phone to go onto Flipgrid to a grid to say what's happening, maybe show their pet, do anything that the kids can see each other's faces is a really nice idea too.
Yeah, I think so let me take that from two different aspects. One, yes, I think Flipgrid is an amazing tool. We've heard teachers being able to create social interaction among students doing that, which is so important right now. Certainly, mobile devices are one way that we can access this. But I know from being in a rural area, one of the concerns that has come to us is that sometimes Wi-Fi, especially high-speed Wi-Fi, doesn't go to some areas. And even when a parent has a phone with a data plan, they only have limited data for the month. And so video eats that up quickly. One thing that we have heard teachers doing is, again, going analog and just making phone calls, making sure that they have a rotation where every 2 or 3 days they're getting to every one of their students to have a short conversation with them, check in and talk to them. And so, again, it's the constraints, right? So the constraint is maybe that's the only way that you can communicate with your students. So you have 3 minutes to develop that connection. What are you going to do? And maybe it doesn't work well the first time you reach out. That's okay. That's the design process, right? If it doesn't work well, you try something new the next time you've got 3 minutes with that student, but you keep trying. And in that way, you build relationships and you try and build community where it's difficult.
Yeah. Holly, you just mentioned something about the phone and about using it to do a video. I also wonder too, for those that don't have access to the internet, my guess is that there's a lot more of them that do have access to a phone, like a telephone, something that's a landline, or, a lot of times with cell phone plans, we don't count minutes anymore. And, that's one of the, I think that's one of the easy ways to start breaking down a little bit of the equity gap in this whole, high tech remote learning situation, is to use that phone line. And because you can use that to jump into Zoom calls, you can use it to jump into Google Meet calls, all of those you're able to call in. So that kind of breaks a little bit of that down, but also, that's a way to get in touch with some of those kids that don't have the internet, is to call, individually, and, they still get to hear your voice. You still get to talk to them. And so, maybe that's another way for us to work through that design thinking process of, trying to identify what the problem is, trying to talk to people, trying to brainstorm solutions. Like, if they don't have access to the internet, then maybe we go back to something, as old and archaic as just a regular phone line,
So I know in California, and I know we're a big state and a lot of stuff happens over here, but Google is actually making sure kids have that data plan and access, and they're spending some huge amount of money. So hopefully maybe phone companies will step up and say, you know what, you get free data this month. And maybe you could use something like Remind, so that you could send just a text message every once in a while to be like, I'm thinking of you, or I miss your smile.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, and I, Holly, I think you're right. And I think, let me just add to that one more step. One thing that I found in my career is that when teachers reach out to companies and say, here's the problem that I'm having with my students, my students are not well, but they will be if you allow me to use your tool like this. Right. Then most places say yes. And I think that if we reached out to phone companies and said that, like, look, I can't connect with 10 of my students online. I don't want them to be left out. They will be okay if I can contact them. Will you give me whatever? I bet that companies would be willing to say yes in those kind of situations.
I think so too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, this has been good, and I've been dropping little comments in from everyone. We're all kind of wrapping our brains around this, I think, of different things to do. So let's just kind of wrap up with this. So Mike, if we've got someone that's been watching this and they're going, I really, really like this idea, and they're trying to figure out how to get it started for themselves. And I know we've kind of touched on some of this a little bit, but just to bring it back around, to wrap things up, what do you think the first steps are for someone who's just totally brand new to all of this? Maybe they've even had their head a lot focused on the academic side of this and not on the empathy side of this. What do you suggest that they do to get started?
Yeah. So first thing for any teacher in this kind of situation, I think this is kind of intuitive, but I'm gonna make it explicit anyway, is reach out to your students and ask them, "Are you okay?" And then encourage them to ask their friends, "Are you okay?" Right? Like, that's empathy at its most basic level. Trying to find out how other people are feeling and put yourself in their situation. So start by doing that for your students, and then encourage them to do that for others. And then based on their responses, you can look at what your next step needs to be. If you have got a class of 20 and all of them say, yeah, we're doing great, we're thrilled learning online, then you can look at some kind of digital way to work on academic content. But if they're not okay, now at least you know that, and you can work on solving that next problem.
Yeah. And if we're trying to find a problem that is important to students, trying to solve one of the, big world problems right now, that's all well and good, but being able to find something that's affecting the people that they love the most, like, I could see that would create a really strong connection, something that they would really get on board with.
Sure. I think, in this time, everybody knows someone else who is going through a rough time, whether that's emotional, whether that's physical, whether that's financial. Everybody is impacted by this in some way. And so giving our students the power to solve those problems by giving them a framework, by giving them ideas, by giving them support, resources. Hey, what do you need? Like, I know that you're passionate about this. How can I help you? But letting them get started and feeling like they've got the power to make a difference for someone else. I've always said that the most powerful moments of my teaching career is when I saw my students light up because they were helping someone else. And I think that doesn't change now, right? If we can give our students the power to do that during this time, then they become more well, and they become more able to help others be well. And that starts a chain reaction that leads to a good place. And we need that now.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think for me at least, the big takeaway from this is just to ask that question. And sometimes that's all that you really need from something like this is the one question that you want to try to wrap your brain around, and that is, what are the problems that students are facing, and how can we help solve them right now? It seems so. It's like you said, it seems so simple, but it bears repeating. So I love it. This is great. Very good. So Holly, anything else you want to throw in or ask before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say I appreciate the look at those kids who aren't connected, because often, because I live in a big city and kids have devices in many of the school districts here, and I forget about that. And so it was this was like the show I didn't know I needed to hear today, but it is. And it's a good reminder. Yeah.
Absolutely. I thought this was a really interesting comment. This just came in from Susie Hiley. She says, I've had a counselor suggest asking, are you good enough? Not like, is your value high enough in society? But if you ask, are you okay? And they say yes, it's like, okay, well, are you okay enough? Because it's easy to dismiss it by saying, yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay. Yeah. And she says you get a more authentic answer from that. I love that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a fantastic point. And it also points out the need for school counselors in every school.
Yes.
Right. Like that is something that as a teacher, that's not something that I'm tuned into. Although I am now, because Susie pointed it out. But that's why our school psychologists and school counselors are so important, and why we need them in every school.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, Mike, this has been fantastic. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Real quick, as we're wrapping up, will you tell everybody where they can find you and tell them a little bit about your book that's coming up?
Sure. So you can find me easiest on Twitter. It's at @msoskil, same as my last name, MSOSKIL. And you see the Flip the System hashtag. I am currently putting out a book with Routledge Education. It will be available this summer, called Flip the System US, How Teachers Can Transform Education and Save Democracy. And the book elevates the voices of diverse teachers from all over the United States and some of the world's leading academics to make the case that if teachers drove education decisions, and every decision made that impacted students was driven by teacher expertise, that our democracy would be more healthy. And it gives steps in how we can make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Very good. All right. Well, this has been a fantastic, right? I know, exactly. This has been so good. Mike, again, thank you so much for taking some time. Holly, thank you for joining us, and really appreciate the insight from the both of you and from everybody that's been watching. So thank you.
Bye now.
All right. And thanks so much for watching. We're going to have lots more of these videos. If you're not subscribed to the Ditch That Textbook YouTube channel, you might want to go ahead and do that so you get reminders whenever we're doing another one of these. My name is Matt Miller for Mike Soskil and Holly Clark. We will see you on the next one.